Good afternoon. I'm J. Catherine Ross, Senior Director of Community Affairs at Georgia Pacific, a member of the Koch family of companies, and we are proud to be here for another year to celebrate the accomplishments of Black men. We understand the importance of entrepreneurship, community, and education within the African American community, and that's why we have partnered with Black Enterprise for over 5 years. For more than 4 decades, Koch and Georgia Pacific, through our respective foundations, support hundreds of community programs and activities to ensure local communities thrive in this changing and dynamic world, including but not limited to our new Profiles of Principled Entrepreneurship series, where we honored Ben McFarland of Help Bond Me, a crowdsourcing platform that will allow pretrial detainees to send arrest notifications to friends, family, followers via social media, text messaging, and email to raise bond currency. So by now, I'm sure a few of you have probably wondered why Koch and Georgia Pacific would be interested in sponsoring a conversation around mental health among African Americans, and specifically Black men, and its intersection with criminal justice. Hopefully the video that you just saw begins to answer that question to some extent. We believe that societies thrive and grow when all individuals can freely participate and maximize their potential. Our current two-tier society fails our community through policies that create unnecessary obstacles and barriers. Some of those policies include how we deal or don't deal with mental health issues in general, but particularly in the African American community. The downstream consequences sadly intersect with the criminal justice system far too frequently. Koch has been actively advocating criminal justice reforms for more than a decade. Some of the key areas include ensuring there are criminal intent standards and ending civil forfeiture of assets, which allows law enforcement to seize cash and property without an individual even being found guilty of a crime. Making sure that due process works as it should and mitigating prosecutorial misconduct. Promoting the right to fair and competent representation. Ending mandatory minimums. And the restoration of rights to those who have served their time or have a criminal record. When 1 in 3 US adults have a criminal record, it is both a moral and fiscal imperative that we find solutions to help remove the economic barriers to opportunity for returning citizens. One step that all Koch companies, including Georgia Pacific, have taken over the years is that we've banned the box, which means our employment applications no longer include a criminal background question. Thank you. So applicants are considered based on their ability to do the job, not on what they did on their worst day. We also work to support second chance and reentry programs aimed at addressing underlying issues which could inhibit the successful assimilation back into the community. But as we sit here in this beautiful resort and we play golf or go to the spa and refuel doing all of the great sessions that Black Enterprise has hosted, let's not think that we're talking about somebody else, somewhere else. Mental health issues can touch us all. It doesn't have to be a diagnosis as dramatic as paranoid schizophrenic. It could simply be you going through a challenging period in your life with a lot bottled up inside and someone pressing the wrong button at the wrong time on the wrong day. I'm a mother, a sister, an aunt, a daughter of strong Black men. I have a view into the daily challenges, the code switching, the mind games that you have to play to survive, much less thrive in this society. But as Brother Damon of Chase shared with us on Thursday, you can't keep it bottled inside because at some point and in some way, it is going to come out. So as a company, Georgia Pacific decided to challenge the status quo by hosting a series of internal conversations with our employees and leadership around human and civil rights, criminal justice reform, and the opioid crisis. Today's conversation concerning mental health of men of color is another conversation we're proud to support, and we hope that you'll find value in it. So let's begin.
Thank you, J. Catherine. Our panel of experts are here to address this encompassing issue that impacts our families, our jobs, and frankly, our everyday lives. It's time to examine how, as Black men, we can support one another in this struggle and not feel stigmatized for reaching out. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel, beginning with the Director of Inside Programs at the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. Please welcome Sam Lewis. Next, welcome Executive Director of Gideon's Promise, Ilham Askaya. Our next panelist is a frequent network television medical contributor and community psychiatrist. Welcome Dr. Janet Taylor. And rounding out today's panel is actor, musician, educator, inspirational speaker, author, and entrepreneur, and on the side he breakdances, Malik Yova.
They weren't ready. They busy eating.
Finally, our moderator is our very own Alfred Edmond Jr. Welcome, Alfred.
Thank you, everyone. I'm a little overexcited. I'm trying to calm down. This is the session that I'm most personally invested in. It's one of the topics I'm most passionate about for business reasons as well as for personal reasons. And we have the perfect combination of people whose expertise and experiences and their own passions and commitments to the health of our community just dovetails perfectly. So you've been introduced to them, but what I want to do, and they already know I'm going to do this, one of the things that happens when you sit at a conference like this is you'll sit for an hour, you listen to an hour's worth of talking, and often you may not remember everything that was said. In fact, you probably won't, especially if you're eating. You're not necessarily taking notes and recording everything. But we want you to leave this session, as with all Black Men Excel sessions, with a personal charge of something that you're going to do or think or communicate differently to the circles of influence that you may have at work, in your community, in your family, in your church, wherever. So this is not just a conversation that happens in the room, it's conversations and actions that ripple effect out into the community so that we can make changes. So I've asked each panelist, if there's only one thing you remember after lunch, if there's only one thing you remember when you get on your planes or get in your cars to leave this place tomorrow or the next day if you're lucky to stay longer for a little vacation, what is that thing about this topic that we want you to walk away with? And then we're going to have a great free-flowing conversation about a variety of issues that affect Black men in particular, but Black people and people in general. So let's start with Mr. Wilson. What's the one thing, if they only can remember one thing when they walked out? Mr. Lewis, excuse me.
Mr. Lewis, like
Forgive
who?
me. Forgive me.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah. So I would say the one thing that I would want you to remember when you leave here today is to be consciously aware of the different levels of trauma that our kids or our youth experience. It can be something like the breakup of a marriage. It can be something like the tragedy of a life, loss of life of a school friend, even the death of a pet, and understanding that there are different levels and different depths that can impact our kids, our youth, and cause them to respond and react in different ways. It'll manifest itself. Our children would tell us without verbally telling us that they've experienced some type of trauma that has impacted how they see the world.
Okay.
All right, I would say that criminal justice reform is this generation's civil rights movement. And we talk a lot about on the front end, doing police reform, fixing prosecutors' offices who tend to overcharge and promote over-sentencing, and we focus on reentry, and all of those are equally important. But what is absent is the importance of public defenders, the defense counsel who represent 80% of the people who come through the criminal justice system. We must advocate to have public defenders sitting at the table when we're talking about policies and reform and boots on the ground.
And I would say your mental health or your life, because we know there's no physical health without good mental health. And mental health is not just the absence of disease like depression or talk about trauma. If you have been sexually or physically abused as a man or a boy, if you have a history of losses in your life, if you wake up, as many of us, feeling like you have to put on your armor or somebody's got your neck to the ground and it stops you from functioning in your relationships, at home and at work, deal with it. It's not something that you have to remedy yourself. Find your doctor to talk to, find a healthcare professional, you can talk to your pastor, but deal with it, because what we keep inside is killing us and killing you as black men.
Thank you. If you leave here with anything, know that I love you, and know that I serve you, and know that it's an honor to represent you, black men especially, but black women as well. But black men especially, I get the opportunity to show vulnerability. I get the opportunity to show humanity, sensitivity, humor, kindness, love, and that's powerful. And as a storyteller, I don't take it for granted over the last 30 years when I see people name their children, their sons, their nephews, their dogs, their sexual toys. Real talk. It's an honor to serve you, and remember that I love you.
The thought I want you to take from this, as your moderator, we think in terms of mental health, but I want to give you an example. So when I tell people that I consult with my personal trainer or fitness coach once a week, every week, I get applause. I get pats on the back. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's wonderful, bro. But when I tell people, and that's true, by the way, I do. But when I tell people I have a standing weekly appointment with my therapist, I don't get the applause. I get, what's wrong? Are you okay? Or behind my back, I didn't know Alfred had. So my mission is for you to see, not just think mental health, think mental fitness. Because when you think fitness, you're not thinking about what you do when you're hurt. You're thinking about what do I do to stay healthy ongoing, and not just waiting till I'm injured or sick to deal with it. So with that, with those 5 thoughts or those 5 ideas in mind that hopefully you'll carry away if you carry nothing else, I ask each of you, and you can just jump in when you want to, what do you see as the current state of the mental health conversation among black men in particular, but in the black community? I think in some ways we've come certainly further than previous generations, but we also have a long way to go to get to the point when dealing with mental health and mental fitness is just considered as normal as going to the doctor when you're getting your checkup. So
Yeah, so I find that more and more black men are reaching out to me for therapy. Not enough, but more. So, and I think there are a number of reasons for that. I mean, historically, our mental health, our IQ, our ability to thrive through conditions has been used against us. In medical books saying that a freed slave was more likely to be depressed. I mean, a freed man was more likely to be depressed than a slave. They have documented wrongly that, black people didn't get depressed because we were so happy all the time. And so that notion and difficulties and barriers to treatment are not an accident. But that being said, I think largely nudged by women, largely nudged by mothers, black men are saying, like, I need help, I want to talk. And I'm saying, come on, let's do it.
I agree that it's increasing, but not nearly enough. Personally, I don't see it enough in the field I work in, which is reentry and rehabilitation inside institutions. I initially said, be aware of the trauma that our children or our youth that we're in close proximity to suffer. And from my personal experience of being in prison for 24 years and now providing services for men and women that are in prison for the past 8 years, the thing that I've noticed most, especially when I work with youth, is trauma that they've suffered when they were young, that has gone unaddressed, no therapy, and they don't know how to ask for it. Encouraging them to do so is key. And the other part is making sure that the services are actually readily available. The organization that I work with, we make sure that we have a therapist on site. All staff have access to those things, and I personally have tapped into that resource because personal experiences in the last few months, I've had a death, I've had a tumor discovered in my wife's brain. She's recovering, but the amount of stress and worry that I was going through, I needed someone to talk to, and without having that immediate access, it would have just been something that it's gonna manifest itself in some way, whether it be through drugs, alcohol, you just react short-tempered, but it will manifest itself. And that link to being able to talk to a therapist and work through those issues is vitally important.
And can I just add one of the things about trauma, the way it affects your body is it begins and ends in your brain, and it's your brain that signals to every organ in your body to turn on. So if you're chronically stressed or have unresolved trauma, that risk of increasing diabetes and heart disease, it can set the inflammation pathway going, inflammatory pathway, which contributes to cancers and can worsen every medical illness that we have. And not to mention, when you're depressed, the last thing you want to do is see your medical doctor. So that's why it's so important that you treat trauma and treat depression.
And I think the trauma, one of the things I noticed with the clients that we serve, so our public defenders represent people coming through the system, is a majority, over half of them are people who are suffering with mental health issues. And we're using the criminal justice system to warehouse our problems versus being proactive and helping to solve them. Then once folks are incarcerated, and people don't think about the families who also face this trauma when your loved one is stripped away from your household. So when I was 5, my father was taken from me, and I say taken from me because he didn't have a good advocate. After 10 years in Attica Correctional Facility in New York, he came home, and rather than being welcome, he had become so institutionalized, he wanted to live in my grandmother's cinder block basement versus being up with the rest of us. And at the time, we just thought, well, you know, it was just daddy, it's just what happened, he was just locked up, and never said he may need some help. He may need some support to matriculate back into society, to have the family dynamic he had before he went in. And fast forward that trauma to his son, my brother, who became depressed, and then he himself had interaction with the police and then was sent to prison for 8 years. And so it's this cycle that is happening to black men, and it's affecting them, it's affecting their loved ones. I had recently went to a federal prison in Atlanta on I call it a jacked up field trip, because they wanted the business leaders to see what really was going on in the prisons. And of course, they didn't show the real things that happen in the prison, and all of a sudden I couldn't breathe. I've never had any issues before. I couldn't breathe because it was the first time that I actually wasn't in the visitor's room like I grew up as visiting my father. I was actually in the cell area in D Block. And just to think about what my dad had to go through every Saturday for 10 years to see us, just to get on the other side, and I couldn't breathe, and they had to take me out. So it's traumas that you don't even realize are happening, not just to the black men, the family, and the young boys. And we have to address it, and we have to be vocal. And that's why I decided to share that story, because it took me 3 years to have the courage to tell that part of trauma that is so important. We have to deal with it.
I think, if I heard you correctly, you asked the state of where the conversation is. Well, if it's any indication, just hanging out in the lobby yesterday, people were excited to come to this session.
That's a real positive,
so
right?
That's an indication. This is my 3rd conference on wellness this year.
Oh, wow.
Since March. I did one in March, one in May, and then today. So, you know, I wrote a piece called Acoustic Chocolate in 2004 about a bunch of essentially depressed musicians. And I wrote it because friends of mine were depressed. Like, there was one musician I play with. We used to play as a group called Acoustic Chocolate, he and I, but he was depressed, and he was often talked about suicide. And I wrote this piece and put him in it, and didn't give him any speaking lines, just to put him around the message of what this was about. And it was about a young man who puts this group together, and right before they're about to get signed, he goes off and does a reality show and gets a deal, and it falls apart. He falls into a depression, and his cousin, who's the comedian that's usually keeping everybody happy, is the one who actually tries to attempt suicide. Oh, wow. And it was based on people that were around me, and I thought that if we told this story and toured it around the country, unfortunately the tour fell apart, and you know, we weren't able to continue that, but 14 years ago, it wasn't a common conversation, certainly in our community. But again, as a storyteller, and why I say I love you, is because I think what we do is so powerful and important. Like I told you on a conference call, I have a piece called Harlem to Hollywood, which is my life story, and it's set in a therapist's office. I started seeing a therapist at 23 years old, I'm 50. I grew up with kids in the Upper East Side of New York. That was what they did, like lunch. Right. Like little Jewish kids were like, oh, I'm going to see my shrink after school. At 12, like that's what they did. And meanwhile, I'm going home and my father's beat me with an extension cord, butt naked. I got shot at 15. I got kicked out the house at 16, you know, with $12 in my pocket. I've been hustling since I was 8, you know, and literally. And so experiencing tremendous, you talk about loss, my parents getting separated, my mother leaving when I'm 10, you know, all my relationships with women and how that's been really me trying to fill that thing, even as a man, dealing with that abandonment, you know, but being able to work through it for all these years and, you know, trying to tell it wherever I can in stories, seeing it not be part of the cultural norm and seeing that flip. So I think we're on a path.
But you need access. I think we talk about it in theory. We tell our stories, and I think what I realize, especially for people who are released from prison, the work that I do, is there's not enough access to support. There's not affordable access. You know, if you all knew the level of work it takes to get a driver's license and social security card when you're released, how can I go get medical help if I don't even have a driver's license to prove I am who I am? And I think for the business leaders in this room, helping to think of creative ways to provide access in impacted communities is crucial.
Can I add to that? So going back to what Malik said, you know, when I grew up with domestic violence in my household too. I've had a therapist. I probably need another one now, but I've had a therapist.
Now listen here, the therapist has a therapist.
Yeah, and I need another one, so I need to go back in.
Right.
But I mean, but the reality is we all have a story, and that fuels us into different actions that we take and how we certainly communicate. I'm sure that my growing up led to my going into psychiatry. But to your point, in this room, we have people who have insurance, who have access to therapists, and do not find and have a therapist. And I think that's a question that you have to ask yourself. If you know that something is not going on with you in your mental health right now, not going on with your relationships, you're not sleeping, you're stressed, you're just off in some way, and you're still not using your resources and using your insurance to find somebody to talk to, then you're missing the point. Because Malik's love is not enough.
That's not what you told me backstage, girl. Not what you said.
Sex toys, though.
So she's lying.
You know, speaking of, I certainly missed. Go ahead, Favor. You go first.
In regard, so the organization that I work for, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, we're made up of and supported by and for formerly incarcerated men and women. We're 800 strong now. Our staff is 75% formerly incarcerated. When we put together this organization, we brought our members together and said, what are the 3 most important things? We actually asked for a list of 10, and we took the top 3. Therapy was second, only to housing, because there's such a great barrier for you to be able to get into an apartment with that box that you check. if you've got a conviction. The third was employment. And so that therapy, when we had a larger discussion just amongst ourselves, what was the trauma that was suffered or that you experienced, or what is it that you're going through? Most of it, not all of it, but most of it was childhood trauma. And this led me to think about asking my juvenile class, which I go into juvenile halls on Saturday nights, 6 to 8, how many kids in this class believe that it's normal to have to fight to go to school? Every kid in the class raised their hand.
Wow.
Every kid thought it was normal to have to fight someone or a gang to go to school. 3 weeks later, I had an opportunity to talk to a bunch of kids that lived in Malibu. Same age bracket. 2 had fights, 30 kids. How many of them thought it was normal to have to fight to go to school? And they looked at me, like 2 of them raised their hand like, what do you mean have to fight? Like we had a fight? And their entire life they had a fight.
Wow.
When we think about that in terms of our kids that are growing up in our communities, and especially in the inner city, that's ridiculous. And then for them to have to hold that inside, and literally it's like if you've ever had, I played sports, so I remember scraping my knee and then opening that wound, and eventually it becomes a big callus. But it's still a wound and it's easily opened. And then you go into the institution, and the same thing, going into an institution and you're dehumanized and you're ground down more and more and more, and then you come home and you don't have readily accessible therapy or someone to talk to. You just bottle that up inside. And good, bad, or ugly, it's gonna manifest itself. Yeah. It's gonna manifest itself, and most of the time it's ugly, which is part of the reason why we have such a high recidivism rate across the nation.
Yes.
Because we have not dealt with this trauma that started at a young age, and we just added layers and layers and layers on top of it, and now I'm home and I'll be all right, and I'll go sleep downstairs because that's where I'm comfortable at.
So this issue of resources and access, first I want to emphasize Dr. Janet's point. Most of us in this room, or many of us, let's say, have access to it, and we don't make it a priority to deal with it for whatever reason, and we need to fix that. Those of us who actually do have the access and could do it. But with Dr. Janet and some other people even here at Black Men Excel, we've been putting together a list of resources that we're going to first put in the Black Men Excel Facebook group community later today, and we're going to put it in other places. So not only for the people in this room, but for you to take to other people, including some resources for people who don't normally have access to get this help. One of the things when we put together this year's list of BE Modern Men of Distinction, we did a special emphasis on BE Modern men who were working in this area. One of them, he's not going to talk, but I want him to at least stand up if he's in the room. Philip Townsend, are you here? Oh, I don't see him. He has a great podcast called How You Doing, Man? Oh, I said Townsend. Sorry, you should have just stood up anyway. You knew I was talking about you. My man. Stand up for a second. I want you to look, this brother is not the kind of brother you would think, oh, I need, mental health service. He's very healthy and fit. He's an athlete. And so we also got to break the stereotype of the image of what it means.
Right.
If you're really strong, you don't need help. When the really strong person asks for help, seeks help, accepts the help. So with that, what do you think Black men need to do to be proactive about protecting, recovering? Because usually the trauma comes first. When you're a kid, you don't know your trauma. You don't know you're traumatized. So it's hard to say, as a 3-year-old, protect your mental health. What about what Black men can do to assume, or people in general, that there was some level of trauma, and that it's their responsibility to kind of start doing things to be proactive about discovering what that might be and then trying to cope with it before I explode, either on others or on myself in some way,
Well,
shape,
I
or
think this one is just very basic. Listen to the person that loves you the most, that is telling you they see something wrong. A lot of times we don't listen to our partners, our wives. I have a husband. Sometimes he don't listen to me. But I'm saying, baby, something's wrong. You got to go do something or else we're going to have problems. But in all seriousness, you know, sometimes you don't see it. And it usually is that persona, the strong person, the leader. You never look sad. Illy, you're always smiling. You're always positive. I have bad days too, right? And so really listen to the people that know you best and follow it and do what you should do. And I think that's the easy, low-level step.
And I think most children do know when they've had some level of trauma, but the reality is almost 70% of our children across every socioeconomic group or class has had some kind of event that's happened. It may be bullying, it could be sexual abuse, it could be how teachers talk to them or their relationship with their parents. And trauma is cumulative.
Yes.
And so even if you haven't had a traumatic experience as a child, you know, our young black males, when they get pulled over by the police, that's trauma to them. And one incident can spin your child into depression and anxiety, and they're not telling you, but things change. So, you know, what black men need to realize is every day you need to do what I'd call a checkup from the neck up and check in and see how you're feeling and what you're doing. And if you notice that you're not happy all the time, and depression is a sad mood that lasts longer than 2 weeks. I mean, we all have times of sadness, and then a change in your functioning, and you're not happy at work, you're not happy at home, you're drinking too much, you're you know, gambling too much or sleeping too much or too little, you may be depressed, and to check in and see. So it really is about individuals taking the responsibility to see how they are doing every single day.
Malik, what about, and one of the things I love about you as a man and as an artist is you've done a variety of roles as an actor in particular, and of course how you present as an author, as an educator, as beyond just an actor. You've really done a lot to challenge and shape and expand the definition of masculinity and black masculinity in particular. So how does that play into this conversation about what we need to do as men? And certainly, I'd like you to jump on too, because the issue of masculinity and what is a man is a big issue, both in prison and out of prison for men, young men in the inner city.
My father comes to mind, starting with my name, Yoba. You know, raising us, telling us Yoba means last of the slaves, a new generation. Raising us with a certain consciousness for greatness. You know, teaching us things like build your own generators so when they turn off the power, you still have lights. Black man gotta hustle. And he was that dude that hustled. He, you know, he was a musician, he was an x-ray technician, he sold clothes. Later on, I found out he sold weed. True story, I found the stash box. You know, he ran with Malcolm X, and in his youth, he sold women. And so he was a hustler, but he had a certain consciousness, particularly at his time. He became Muslim in the 50s, which wasn't sexy or popular. And so he was a maverick, and he was a person who, when my parents separated, 6 kids stayed with him. And so raising 6 kids in Harlem in the 70s and the 80s, he kicked 4 of us out by the age of 16.
How many brothers did you have?
1 brother, 4 sisters. Okay. But he believed that I kicked you out because I taught you how to sew, how to shop, how to cook, how to clean, how to budget, but most importantly, how to take care of community. So there was a parent in our building who was doing an 8-year bid because he was accused of rape. I say accused because it was never proven, but a black man did 8 years, left a family of 3. My father took care of that family. We came home from school one day in 2nd or 3rd grade. There was kids in our house. I'm like, who are these kids? Their mother had a psychotic break, and she was at Bellevue, and they were in our house. He was a union delegate. He used to take care of the union, his rep. So for me, you know, ideas around masculinity weren't shaped by, ironically, television or popular culture. There was no TV in the house. He refused to put the idiot box in the house, and there were lots of books. And so when I played a father on television, you know, I love to tell the story about how the writers would write, JC prepares a TV dinner for G. I'm like, nah, props, go get real food. We're gonna cook in the scene.
Right.
My father he used to also beat my ass, and my father never kissed me. But I used to kiss my son on television or make him kiss me. Like if you watch New York Undercover, those moments where I'd be like, yo, give me a kiss, that was never scripted. That was me thinking about the impact that I know millions of people are watching this and they need to see this. And that's why I say I love you. Because you know, through all of these characters that I play, and I'm very, very proud, 30 years in the game, 50 movies, 13 TV series, like as a series regular, that's extraordinary to grow up in a household where a father said, you can't do that. Right? And so for me, you know, masculinity has always meant being in the give a damn business. Because I learned that when you give a damn about things, people, places, spaces, they give a damn about you. And you get to live with a certain kind of grace that you don't experience when you think about just how much money you have, how many women you have, how much power you have, who you can exclude, who you can, you know, run over. No, it's like, yo, come here, let me share this food with you. Let's sit down and eat. I know I don't have much, but let me do this with you because when we can both eat, we can do this. Yes. And so for me, you know, you know, grace is important. And I'm going through, my mother has Alzheimer's. You know, 6 kids are caring for our mother with a community. And when I say I love you, it's real. I'm performing one night in Brooklyn at an open mic, and I mentioned just in a freestyle that talk about Alzheimer's. A woman comes up to me and gives me resources, and that's how we're helping my mother. I was in Florida a month ago doing a show, a little concert here, and I sang a song I wrote about my mother. A woman comes up to me and says, you know, because you sang that song, I'm gonna come to Brooklyn and help your mother. And so what I've learned about masculinity, it's about love. It's about vulnerability. It's about humility. It's about humanity. It's about service. It's about, I get excited. I wake up every day excited because I know when I move into the world, it's with a spirit of service. And as an artist, where 98% of the time, Screen Actors Guild will tell you you're not working, I've never stopped working. When I was blessed to get an audition for a movie called Cool Runnings. Because I met a guy named Jamal Joseph who had written a film called Seriously Fresh in 1989 that I found out about when I was volunteering for the City Kids Foundation in the summer of 1989. And I go to work one day volunteering, and there's a sign on the wall that says, audition for a film. I went to that audition, I got that movie. Jamal wrote that movie. I found out he was in a Black Panther party. I asked him to come talk to my kids during a Friday night meeting. He's the one who told me about Cool Runnings and the audition for Cool Runnings, which led to New York Undercover. So when I look at the trajectory of my life, service leads everything.
Yes.
And everything.
Now, Mr. Lewis. So here's that beautiful definition, which I happen to share, of what Black masculinity or masculinity is supposed to be. I would imagine is at 180 degrees away from what the men and the boys that you deal with when they're thinking about this is how I have to be a man, whether it's to protect myself, whether it's to protect the people I perceive to be my family. What is the conversation about the beliefs about masculinity that you know, maybe hinders the ability to recover and re-enter society based because of all of the neglect and the lack of help and the lack of access to therapy and other resources?
So first I want to say, and I told this to Malik when we were walking over here, I watched New York Undercover when I was in prison. And the interaction, I told him the interaction between him and G was profound. That was one of my favorite dramas. I called it a sitcom accidentally because I don't know the difference. but it was one of my favorite dramas because of the interaction he had with his son, and it reflected how it should be. In regards to your question, most of the kids, we had a discussion on compassion. And some of the youth that I work with may end up in the men's county jail, the adult county jail, or end up in state prison because of the sentences that they're given. So when we approach this topic of compassion, there was a huge wall. There's no compassion. That's weakness. And I went down this track of explaining to them that compassion was many things, but what it was not was weakness. And the best lessons that I could give them, I had these pictures of these wolves. I came back the following week, and these wolves, if you know what an alpha wolf is, it's the last wolf in the pack. That wolf protects, that wolf cares for, that wolf is not the beast or the tough guy in the pack. That wolf, the beta female, leads the pack. The the alpha male is in the back making sure everybody's safe and is cared for. And explaining to them this way, like if you see a wolf is they can be pretty big. And explaining this and bringing pictures and videos to these young men, they started understanding that toughness is actually based on being able to show love. And then I told them, I said, I understand the situation that you're going into because you're going to go into an environment where that's not how it's viewed, but I want you to understand as you move forward in your life that compassion is necessary, love is necessary, it's part of who you are. You have to love yourself first in order to love others, and you have to be compassionate to yourself and show compassion, and it'll come back to you. And some of this is just planting seeds with a 16 or 17-year-old that may end up in prison for 20 years. But I know it's a seed that'll follow through because when we sit down and they ask me, Mr. Sam, why do you come in here every Saturday night? And I tell them, because I love you, and I don't want to see you come back to places like this.
So let me shift gears just a little bit because we like to think that we often do what's best for ourselves because of the rewards, the positive result that comes of it. But unfortunately, too often, we're only moved to do what's good for us when we're cognizant of the cost of not doing it. And I want to start with Mrs. Skia. Let's say we just leave things as they are.
Oh, goodness.
And you know, I mean, now we're on a positive path, so we've obviously have decided that we shouldn't just leave things as they are. But what is the cost, and we should all weigh in, of saying, you know what, this is not that big a deal. If you can get a therapist, get one. If you can't, you can't. Just pray on it, which is, you know, in my opinion, to me, it was just pray on it. I'm like, pray for a therapist, but that's another story. But what is the cost of us, of all of us, not taking some kind of action, not making some kind of different choice and a different way of thinking and impacting other people when we leave here?
I think the biggest cost is the cost of losing our children. If we don't take care, I think society has been set up and a narrative has been drawn about people that look like us, that we are different, that we are unworthy, that our children are unworthy. And if we don't handle our own issue and stress, we're going to lose our children. And that is happening right now in the work that I do. 2.7 million children have at least one incarcerated parent. That's 1 in 28. A lot of it has to do with 50% of the people come in with mental health issues. We haven't dealt with our stuff. And it's impacting and it's dismantling households. And I don't care what anybody says, a family needs 2 parents. I don't care who they are, you need both sides to be whole. Hell, 3 parents, right? They used to say it takes a village, the whole village, like in Malik's building. And so we really, at the end of the day, need to look at the people who cannot speak for themselves, which are our children, who are taught that it's not cool to be vulnerable. And we have to really look at, are we doing the best for them? And speak up. And so I think that's the largest cost that I'm seeing right now with the number of juveniles who are entering into the criminal justice system. A lot of it has to do with stuff that we haven't dealt with and taken care of.
You know, I got to say, and I definitely want you guys to continue, one of the biggest barriers, whether you're a child or an adult, and I'm going to speak for black families and maybe in all families, between a person who needs therapy getting it and them getting to the therapist, one of the biggest barriers often is the people in their own family. The people around them. The person telling you you don't need to be doing that is the person you're supposed to be able to trust to protect you and guide you. So some of this is changing the thinking in our families and our conversations so that whether it's a teenager or a child or even an adult says, I need some help, they're not told, oh, you'll be all right. Don't, you know, what do you got to be sad about? That kind of thing.
I think, but speaking about black mental health and black masculinity, you can't talk about that without talking about the relationship between black men and black women.
Right.
And our children do fare better in 2-parent homes, but you can have 2 parents who are separated who still show love to their parent. And a lot of times the conflict between the parents drifts down to the kids, and the kids don't feel loved and accounted for. And I think, you know, when I'm talking to black women, and I'll take any barrage of comments from black women, you know, what I've learned throughout my life, and I'm divorced now, is that our black men undergo, and not to say the black women don't either, because we do, but undergo so many layers of microaggressions and have to fight so much on the outside in the workspace, certainly dealing whether you are incarcerated or work in those levels, that the last thing they want to do when they come home is fight with us. And, right?
The men are like, yes.
Right?
He had a fight last night.
But it doesn't, right?
That was this morning. That was last night.
But
I'm going to say this, if
but
you
at
ain't
the
no
same
punk,
time-
clap.
But I think our black men need to come home and communicate with us.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be
That's true, too.
when they want to do it. So I think there's work to be done there because I do think that it impacts our families in a major, major way.
Is that the all time we have left right
No,
there?
no, that's to count down the Q&A. So Malik and me are both watching the clock. We're going to start Q&A in a couple of minutes, so be ready. But no, we still got
Okay,
some time.
so yeah, because I could wait to the Q&A, but I'm just curious who the audience is. How many people here actually actively have some sort of therapist going on in their life? By show of hands. Okay, cool. So that's like 3%.
Right.
How many have ever done any kind of therapy? Okay, that's even better. Okay, cool. So we're talking to the converted, which is good. No, I think it's important because I think, we are living in a world where adults are running amok. And the kids are asking a lot of questions. And I know for me, when I find myself really stressed, in the middle of a day, I just stop and breathe, like as a practice. Like literally we'll just take a moment, might be 10 minutes, might be 20 minutes, 5 minutes, just to breathe and recenter and check in, because I do the daily check-in. And I'm going through some tremendously stressful things in my life right now. And, I talked about grace before. And again, as an artist, Robeson said it the best, artists are gatekeepers of truth.
Yes.
And I live proud to be part of that lineage of artists that understood that. And being connected to the Belafontes of the world, who was connected to the Robesons, and I'm connected to like younger ones coming after me. I think it's important as artists because we learn these tools in theater, right? You learn to breathe, you learn to center yourself, you learn to listen. That's where the songs come from, and the dialogue comes from, and the improv, and it's the laboratory of life, and we get to explore all these places and spaces that people who don't do what we do get to do. And feelings, and real feelings, because it's not about pretending. It's about being. It's about really entering into another reality. So what does this feel like? How would I react in this moment? And so that breathing thing for me has been really, really important as I get older. And I've been thinking a lot. I turned 50 last September, and one of the most constant thoughts I've had is, what's our capacity for joy and pain?
Right.
And I was with this Ayurvedic doctor recently who was 80, who looked like she was 60. And I asked her the question, it's like, are we like a hard drive? Like, can I dump this stuff, all of it? Because sometimes it's painful. And I had a period a couple of months ago where I was like, I'm bugging out. Like this, and a lot of it was taking on, because I am an empath, and people ask for my time, and I give them an audience because they need to release. But sometimes we take that on, and I'm like, yo, I'm spinning right now, and I don't do, that's not my norm. I started playing golf again. It helped me out. That's one of the true story. 2 months ago, I was like, yo, I need to find those things, the breathing. Okay, 9 holes in the morning at 6 in the morning in Brooklyn.
By yourself?
By myself.
Exactly.
I don't want to play with other people.
Yeah, right.
I want to be out there. No, I don't. I want to be with my thoughts.
But what Malik described speaks to, we're talking about compassion and self-compassion, recognizing when you're suffering and doing something to ease the suffering.
Yes.
And so you talk to somebody, you're playing golf, you're physically active, that's what it's about, is how we can ease our own suffering. And that's where the joy and pain coexist, because they're always together. It's just back to your wolf, like which glass do you want to fill? Do you want to stay in pain, or do you want more joy? I mean, that's our capacity as human beings, is to be able to take control of that and figure that out for ourselves.
Mr. Lewis.
We have the power.
How do we, being able to elevate the voices, Malik has a platform, and finding people that have the platform to normalize seeking therapy, to make it normal. Make it normal, because right now it's like, I don't need no therapist. I'm a tough guy. And
Or
that's,
even more, because you saw those people raise their hands, what I would have asked you is, how many of you have told other people you're seeing therapists?
That's what I was gonna
Because
ask.
on Facebook, every chance I get, I'm like, I see a therapist every week. And it always releases a wave of other people saying,
Thank God
I
you
do,
said that.
I
That
do
was
too,
true, yeah.
but their family didn't even know. So when we talk about normalization, just the way you wouldn't flinch at saying, yeah, I'm getting my annual physical right now, I'm going to see my doctor, you wouldn't think of keeping that a secret. Many of you are getting this help and hiding it like it's something to be ashamed of, as opposed to, no, this is me taking a proactive step for my own health. At this point, we're at Q&A time. Let me emphasize that somebody should have a mic. I'm hoping running around with a handheld mic. But you heard it during the course of this conference. Q&A. And unlike some of the other moderators who are more polite than I am, if I don't feel a question mark coming,
You're gonna cut it.
I will cut you off. The goal is to get as many questions in as possible, not for you to turn into a fifth panelist. Because if there's a question you're asking, there's 40, 50, maybe 100 people in the room that need those answers. So the goal is to get as many questions in as possible. So please keep it brief, make it a question so we can get it. We got 15 minutes. Let's get through it. Easily. Sir.
Hi, Dr. Janet, this is for you. My name is Dr. Charles Corprew. You've talked a lot about going to therapy. Could you speak more about what a therapist needs to give from that cultural competency perspective? Because that's really key. Just going to a therapist is one thing, but getting the right therapist is the best thing.
Absolutely.
You're right. It definitely is a good fit. You know, a lot of times people want a black therapist, but there may not be any black therapists in their area, male, female. I mean, think about what you want. With technology, certainly, there's opportunity to Skype if you need someone who's not in your immediate area. But what you want to think about is that person competent. Sometimes, to Alfred's point, if you talk to people and say, I'm looking for a therapist, people you didn't know have a therapist sometimes have suggestions. Oftentimes, you can also start with your primary care doctor. They know you, they know your personality, they can refer people. But you want to be with somebody you trust, you want to be with somebody who's competent, somebody you can afford, and understand that there are times during therapy you may feel uncomfortable. That may not be the fault of the therapist, but therapy is meant to make you feel uncomfortable. That's the time you have to go back for a second time. So it's about fit, it's about price. Often people have insurance, they don't want to use their insurance because they don't want their employer to know. Use your insurance. You don't have to spend out of pocket to find one. And the main thing is to keep going back.
Who's next? Where's the mic? Help me out. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, hello. My name's Email Akiva out of Pittsburgh. In life, sometimes, and for us to get to that next tier, we have to select our own personal board of directors. And to help us get through, I'm facing where a loved one was recently diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I wanted to get some advice on you on what board of directors should I help to select in order to help her out of that.
So my mother has bipolar disorder. So I've lived your life since we realized it when I was 10. And I would say, in terms of that board of directors, is someone who knows your loved one well, but you also have to talk to the person who has it to make sure it's okay to have the conversation, because the stigma still exists that is mental health. And so for us, my siblings and I, we are fortunate. There are 12 of us in total, but she has 4 of us. And we are her board. We are her advocates. We brought on an aunt to help who can, because they grew up together, can explain things a little bit differently, because sometimes you're my children, I don't need to do what you tell me to do, right? And to have that person. So for us, it's really digging deep, thinking about who they talk about in their childhood or their best friend. A lot of times the best friends are the best people to bring on as part of that board of advocates. And also always find someone who is an expert in this area, because it's not just dealing with the mental health issue of your loved one, but how you yourself are coping and dealing with it too. And that was the one piece we were absent in doing when we first started helping her.
So I would add, support is key. NAMI, the National Alliance of Mentally Ill, is a great source of resources and support. And they have chapters in every city. The other is to get your loved one to sign a release of information so that you can talk directly to the person's doctor. And even if you don't, if they refuse to sign a release of information, which some people do, you can always call the doctor or call the healthcare practitioner with your concerns. They just can't talk about that person. And then just inform yourself about, medication, side effects. And bipolar is really probably one of the most treatable mental illnesses to have, so have a lot of hope, but know that when you have bipolar disorder, people do better when they stay on their medicines for the rest of their lives.
I wanted to tell you, those of you who have questions, it's easier for you to go to the mics than the mics to come to you. So there's a mic on either side of the room. And so if you have a question, you should go to the mic. That'll be a lot easier than them trying to weave around the tables to get to you. So over here on this side.
All right. Hey, family. My name is Coach Cass, love coach and matchmaker. My question is, I recently heard that it's important to bring your child, like how you bring your child annually for a checkup to the doctor, that maybe you bring them to a therapist for a checkup once a year, just like they do their teeth, they go to the doctor. So how early would you say is a thing to bring a child to a therapist? And is it like a child psychologist? Like what type of therapist would you bring a child to?
I feel like I'm answering my question. I don't know if you necessarily need to bring your child to a therapist for a checkup, so to speak, because, the thing about medicine is we get paid to diagnose. And if you bring your child in, then chances are I'm going to make a diagnosis, right? Your child may not need a diagnosis. So I think on the one hand, we want to be aware of our children's mental health and how they function, but if there's not a problem, we don't want to create it. What you can look for in your children are if, we're straight A's and their grades drop. They start not sleeping, and our kids are not sleeping because when they close the door at night, they're playing video games or on their phones or whatever. Our kids don't sleep, then they don't focus at school. So I think really be aware of how your children's patterns are, and then if there's a problem, investigate. But I would not go looking for a problem. And initially, you can take them to their pediatrician and they can make a referral. But we over-medicate our kids. Black boys are some of the most over-medicated with medications for ADD and ADHD. Not to say that if your child has it, they shouldn't be on a medication, but we just have to watch how we really get labeled and pathologized.
And before we take the next question, I do want to, this could be a whole nother session, what I'm about to say, but there's a direct line between black kids in general and black boys being more likely to be defined as discipline issues in school, and then by the time they're teenagers, suspects, and then next thing you know, they're being groomed, and now they're in the criminal justice system. I mean, that didn't start when they turned 17 or 15.
It started with the third grade reading scores.
Exactly.
The competency test is how prisons are built in a lot of states in this country.
Yeah.
They look at the third grade reading test scores, standards, and determine how many beds need to be built.
Yep.
Yes. Hello? When my cable breaks down, I don't call my dentist. Where is the power of God in all his expertise?
I thank God for my therapist every week.
I think
every week.
He brings up an important point. I think that if I heard you correctly, in the context of this conversation, we're talking wellness in general, and personally, there are 5 pillars for me. So spiritual, financial, mental, emotional, physical. And so for me, every single day of my life, I am with my trainer, I am working out, I will see my therapist, I will get on my knees and pray,
Yes.
I will read scripture, I will read financial, I'll watch Bloomberg, I'll invest, I'll handle my business. And I think that we have to think of our wellness from a holistic standpoint. We come from a people who were traumatized, especially as African Americans. I'm not sure if I detected a slight accent. Do you have an accent? So, what's that?
Virginia.
But shit. Jamestown.
Jamestown, yes.
Think about the trauma in Jamestown.
Absolutely.
Willie Lynch speech, 1712.
Go ahead, Malik.
Jamestown, Mr. Virginia. Think about this. Willie Lynch, where we get lynching from. If you put the slaves against each other, the tall versus the short, the light versus the dark, the high achiever versus the low achiever. You have them fight each other. You create an environment where they don't trust each other. You do this for 1 year, the slaves will remain perpetually distrustful.
And we're still doing it
And
now.
they taught that to slave masters so that we can suffer for thousands of years. That is written in the speech that he gave in 1712 in Jamestown. And so when you think about the juxtaposition of that type of trauma that's been passed on in our DNA at this point, we were praying then too.
Yes.
But we never addressed the fundamental issue of, no, those niggas is happy. Keep beating them. Keep them So I think that we have to think about all of this together. And we do need to pray, please direct my steps so I can find the person who can help me heal these things that I suffer from.
So simply to your point, people ask me how I survived 24 years in prison. I was in some of the worst places like Corcoran, Pelican Bay. And I say two things. First and foremost, God, and second, my mom. God gave me my mom. Without that, I don't think I would be here today. So literally, I pray, I read scripture, my family, like we pray together. So that's part of it. The other part is that God gives us certain abilities to do things. I have high blood pressure. I have to take high blood pressure medication every day. I have a family member that's bipolar. He has to take medication that keeps him functioning. He stopped taking it twice since I've been home in 8 years, and we watched him spiral. And the second time we got him back on, I had this conversation with him. I said, if I stop taking high blood pressure medication because it's hereditary, then I'm probably going to end up having a stroke and I won't be here. Just as if you don't take your medication, you'll go back into that same spiral. Those are facts. Believing in God that we're able to do these things, that man has been able to create these medications to give us, to help us be able to move forward, I think is part of the foundation, and being thankful that we're able to do those things. So God is central to all those parts.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Kayla, actress, host. I guess my question would be geared towards Malik.
Was that a plug? I'm an actress.
Yes, it is. Yes. But my question, when you brought up being before, I'm studying method acting and the Eric Morris system of being, and it's bringing up stuff. And I did have therapy when I was younger for a lot of those things that I thought that I was past. So how, I guess my question is, when you need to connect with some of that trauma to endow it in a scene or to, bring it up, how do you clear it? Because, through the therapy.
I'm sorry, stop talking. They're messing up your shot. He's losing his mind because they turned the lights down. That dude right there with the blue shirt, I'm snitching. He turned the lights. Stop messing up your shot. She's an actress, dude. This is her moment. Girl, come and step into the lights so we can see you. She gonna do it too. She takes direction well. That's good. That's good. These are good. See? She needs some special light. There you go, girl. You got your close up. You right there. That's your shot.
That's your shot.
There it is. Look at that. Soft lighting.
Thank you. So I guess my main question would be, for traumas that you've had in your life, you seek therapy, you felt like you've gotten through it. How do you handle that when different triggers,
It keeps
bring
coming
it up?
girl. It keeps coming up.
I know, but like.
I'm shooting a show right now. I'm doing that show, God Friended Me, which is actually some really feel-good television. Premiere September 20th.
Is that
September
a plug?
30th. It is a plug.
Okay.
And you know what? A shameless plug, because it's shocking that white producers were committed to putting a black family on television about some real relative and relevant things for our times. And I can tell you, I'm really proud of that young man, Brandon Michael Hall, who's the lead. Joe Morton's in it. I played an uncle. It's some of the best thing I've ever been a part of, and they're doing it for the right reasons, which is rare. But I'm dealing with some trauma with my son right now. It shows up in my work, right? My son is 16, and he's doing that 16-year-old thing, not talking. And so I have a baby mama who chooses not to talk. She hasn't talked to me since December of 2016, and we're raising a boy. And I'm in that boy's school, I'm at his golf program. I'm like, yo, I'm in your face. What are you doing? It's traumatizing as a parent. I open the script. I have a scene with Joe Morton where I have to tell him the same things that people have been telling me about how to handle my stress related to my son. I started crying. I'm reading this, I said, I see you, God. I swear to God, I'm sitting at the computer and I'm like, you know what, see God? But that's the grace. That's the grace, is that this work shows up as an offer. I'm minding my business. Here you have an offer to, no, really.
But you allowed it.
I understand that.
I mean, you're accepting it.
Yes, I definitely accept
Right.
it, but it's the grace, and it all goes back to the service, because how I'm able to then use that, and I understand why it shows up in my work. When I was doing Why Did I Get Married, I was going through divorce.
Oh, wow.
I can't tell you how many jobs I've done in my career where it shows up in the work, and that's the gift. And that is why I say I love you, and that is why, as storytellers, allow yourself to have those experiences. Allow yourself to have it be hard, because if it was easy, everybody could do it, and everybody ain't doing it. And it's a rare gift to be given the opportunity to have the work show up, and to dignify it, and to honor it, and to serve it.
I want to piggyback on something Mr. Lewis said earlier for this person.
Did that answer your question? Good.
So one of my mistakes, I first started seeing therapists now 25 years ago, I think, when I first got my first therapist. And one of the mistakes I made is something that people in general do, in black men in particular, or men in particular do, and black men in particular do. We think we're going there to get fixed, and then it's fine. So where we get therapy, and then we think, I'm fine, I'm good, I fixed that, I'm going on, and then it surfaces again. That's the same thing as Mr. Lewis saying, oh, I took my blood pressure pills, I'm good, I feel good. I don't need to take these pills anymore, which lots of men do, by the way, and then the stroke happens. So part of what I've had to accept, that the reason why I have a weekly therapist, is part of it is prevention and maintaining my health. Part of it is recognizing that some of this trauma is going to have to be managed for the rest of my life. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I mean, this was a young lady that asked this question, but too many of us men, we think, good, saw you 6 times, therapist, I'm out, thanks, bro. And then we go on and wonder why it resurfaces. We are out of time. Please give our audience a round of applause. I mean, our panel a round of applause. Yes, yes.